For 40 years, the FDA's standard pesticide test could not detect glyphosate. Not wouldn't. Couldn't. The chemistry didn't work on it. A 2014 government audit called it out. The agency didn't fix it until 2016. And testing stayed patchy for years after that. So when you've wondered why it took a state government stunt to catch any of this, instead of the federal agency whose whole job is food safety, that's the real answer. The tool was broken. In February 2026, Florida finally ran the test anyway on 8 breads from 5 major brands. 6 came back positive for glyphosate. The highest number wasn't from a cheap brand, it was from one with an organic seal, sold at the store people trust most specifically to avoid this. 10 brands, counted down. 3 that actually held up. And in every single one, a fact you won't have heard anywhere else. Let's go. The worst 10. Number 10. Great Value Whole Wheat. Walmart's house bread. Cheap and always in stock. Independent laboratory testing commissioned by the Detox Project found 340 parts per billion of glyphosate in Great Value 100% whole wheat, well under the EPA's legal ceiling of 30,000 ppb for wheat. But that ceiling was set for one chemical from one food source in isolation, not for someone getting trace exposure from cereal, crackers, and bread across the same day. Here's the fact worth knowing. The FDA's legal whole wheat bread standard actually does require the flour to be 100% whole wheat by weight. That specific label is real and enforceable. But drop the word whole and just call it wheat bread, and there's no minimum whole grain requirement at all. Plenty of wheat bread on that same shelf is mostly refined white flour with caramel coloring added to look like it's made from whole grain. Walmart posted over $700 billion in revenue last year. Sourcing cleaner grain at that scale is a margin decision, not a resource constraint. Number 9. Maket Pantry Organic. Target's organic whole wheat sandwich bread carries a full USDA organic seal and tested at 348 ppb of glyphosate in that same round of independent testing, higher than several conventional loaves on this list. Here's how that happens. USDA organic certification verifies the farmer didn't intentionally apply glyphosate. It says nothing about spray drift from a neighboring conventional field. What most people don't know is how that certification is actually policed. A USDA accredited inspector visits the farm or facility once a year, audits paperwork and practices, and only occasionally pulls a sample for residue testing as part of that annual visit. It is not a program that tests every finished batch of bread before it reaches a shelf. The European Union actually draws a sharper legal line here than the US does. Under EU organic rules, if residue is traced to accidental drift, the product can keep its organic status, but if intentional use is proven, certification is revoked outright. The US system doesn't distinguish the two nearly as clearly. The seal is real. So is the number next to it. Nothing connects the two. Number 8. Orowheat Organic. 2 families started Orowheat in Los Angeles in 1932. Grupo Bimbo, the Mexican baking conglomerate, acquired it in 2009, and since then has also absorbed Arnold, Sara Lee, Entenmann's, Thomas's, and Ballpark, among others. One company now owns what most shoppers still shop as competing: independent brands. Bimbo pulls in roughly $22 billion a year. Here's a fact that puts the whole practice in context. The reason glyphosate shows up in wheat at all usually traces back to pre-harvest desiccation, spraying it directly on the standing crop to dry it out faster before harvest. Several European countries have moved to restrict or phase out that specific practice over the past several years, precisely because it concentrates residue directly in food crops rather than being washed off or broken down in soil beforehand. The US has no comparable restriction on pre-harvest use. Independent glyphosate figures specific to current Orowheat Organic product lines are difficult to find published anywhere, which for a company controlling this much of the bread aisle is itself worth noting. Number 7. Nature's Own. Flowers Foods, a $5 billion a year company, owns Nature's Own as its flagship brand. Florida's Department of Health tested two Nature's Own products in February 2026. Butter bread came back at 190.23 ppb and perfectly crafted white at 132.34 ppb. Past the glyphosate number, check the ingredient label: calcium propionate, a preservative studied for behavioral effects in children, DATEM, a chemically modified dough strengthener, and sodium stearoyl lactylate, an emulsifier that keeps the bread soft weeks past when a normal loaf would go stale. Here's a detail worth sitting with. A product literally named butter bread is not required by any FDA rule to contain actual butter as its primary fat source, as long as butter flavoring appears somewhere on the ingredient list. The name describes the flavor profile, not a minimum dairy content. A 2025 lawsuit filed against Flowers Foods alleges some Nature's Own products are marketed as free of artificial preservatives while still listing ascorbic acid on the label. The company has denied the claims. Number 6. Arnold Organic. Arnold's been on shelves since 1940, and its organic line launched with all the signals health-conscious shoppers look for. USDA Organic, whole grains listed first. Arnold is owned by Bimbo Bakeries USA, the same parent as Oroweat. Here's the fact almost nobody catches. Several Bimbo-owned breads, Arnold included, list cultured wheat flour on the ingredient panel. Under USDA's Rule of 3, the standard used to decide what can be served as whole grain in school meals and WIC-approved foods, cultured wheat flour doesn't count as a whole grain or an enriched grain ingredient at all. That's a specific, stricter test than what a company needs to meet to put whole grain on a bag it sells you directly at a grocery store. A school lunch loaf gets checked against a more precise ingredient rule than the one on your own kitchen counter does. Sara Lee, Nature's Own, and Dave's Killer Bread have all been independently tested for glyphosate by outside labs at various points. We could not locate any published glyphosate testing for Arnold Organic specifically. That's not proof of a problem, but for a brand under the same corporate umbrella as several tested products, the silence is conspicuous. Two companies, most of the aisle. Here's the pattern worth sitting with. Bimbo Bakeries USA owns Oroweat, Arnold, Sara Lee, Thomas's, Entenmann's, and Ballpark. Flowers Foods owns Nature's Own, Wonder Bread, and, as you'll see in a moment, Dave's Killer Bread. Two corporations controlling a huge share of what looks on the shelf like a dozen independent choices. When you're picking between brands in the bread aisle, you're very often picking between two supply chains wearing different packaging. Number 5. Wonder Bread. Wonder Bread doesn't claim to be organic, it sells itself as the classic American loaf. Florida's Department of Health tested Wonder Bread Classic White in February 2026 and found 173.19 ppb of glyphosate. The ingredient label lists calcium sulfate, the same compound used in construction drywall, here functioning as a dough conditioner alongside sodium stearoyl lactylate and enriched bleached flour. Here's the enriched story almost nobody knows. It isn't a modern marketing add-on, it's a public health mandate that started in 1943, when the War Foods Administration made enriching flour temporarily compulsory nationwide after military recruiters found alarming rates of iron and B vitamin deficiency in young men showing up to enlist. The nutrients added back today, iron, thiamine, niacin, folic acid, exists specifically to replace what industrial milling strips out of the wheat kernel in the first place. Enriched is a euphemism for we removed the nutrients, then added a fraction of them back by law. Wonder Bread is owned by Flowers Foods, same parent as Nature's Own, same supply chain. Number 4. Sara Lee Honey Wheat. Sara Lee has been a kitchen staple for 70 years. Florida's Department of Health test found 191.04 ppb of glyphosate in Sara Lee Honey Wheat, the single highest reading in that entire state testing round. Higher than Wonder Bread, higher than Nature's Own. Here's the fact worth knowing, and it's more specific than most people assume. The FDA actually has a policy on this. A 1988 compliance guidance states the agency believes bread should contain at least 8% honey, measured against the weight of the flour, to be labeled honey bread, and that below that level, honey shouldn't be featured prominently in the product name. The catch is that this is guidance, not a binding legal standard, so it's enforced at the FDA's discretion rather than as an automatic rule. And honey only has to be listed in its actual order on the ingredient panel, wherever that lands. Sara Lee is owned by Bimbo Bakeries USA, acquired in 2011. Number 3. Pepperidge Farm. Owned by the Campbell's Company, a $10 billion plus corporation. Independent lab testing found 587 ppb of glyphosate in Pepperidge Farm's 100% whole grain whole wheat bread, and 531 ppb in its Jewish rye and pumpernickel deli swirl, among the highest results recorded for any branded bread in that testing round. Worth noting for fairness, the same testing found Pepperidge Farm's Farmhouse Hardy White came back with no detectable glyphosate at all in Florida's 2026 round. This brand is not uniform, and the contamination is concentrated specifically in the whole grain and rye lines. The reason traces back to farming practice. Glyphosate sprayed as a pre-harvest desiccant concentrates in the outer hull of the wheat kernel, the part whole wheat bread keeps and white bread strips away. Choosing whole grain, in this specific case, can mean choosing more exposure, not less, which is precisely the opposite of what the whole grain is healthier message on every nutrition website tells you, and neither side of that conversation is talking to the other. Glyphosate's manufacturer, Bayer, has paid roughly $11 billion to settle close to 100,000 lawsuits alleging its Roundup herbicide caused non-Hodgkin lymphoma, and in February 2026 proposed a further $7.25 billion settlement to resolve remaining and future claims while continuing to maintain the product is safe. Number 2. Dave's Killer Bread. The brand health-conscious shoppers reach for with total confidence. Oroweat Organic, non-GMO project verified, a redemption story founder on every bag. Flowers Foods bought it in 2015 for $275 million and folded it into the same nationwide distribution network as Wonder Bread and Nature's Own. Here's the fact that undercuts half the clean bread marketing in this entire video. There is no commercially grown genetically modified wheat anywhere in the United States. None. Every loaf on this list, organic or not, tested clean or not, is made from wheat that was never GMO to begin with. U.S. Wheat farmers have spent decades actively blocking GMO wheat from reaching the commercial market to protect export relationships with countries that won't buy it. A non-GMO project verified seal on a wheat bread is verifying something that was never actually at risk in the first place. It's not a lie. Exactly, it's a real audited certification, but it's answering a question about wheat that didn't need asking. Florida's Department of Health found 11.85 ppb of glyphosate in Dave's Killer Bread White done right, and 10.38 ppb in its 21 whole grains and seeds, genuinely the lowest readings of any bread in that state test, and worth crediting. But lowest of the group tested isn't the same as the zero this brand's premium price and organic identity implicitly promises. A 2024 class action alleges the company overstates the protein content on the front of certain package labels. Flowers Foods has denied the claims. Number 1. 365 by Whole Foods. Amazon owns Whole Foods. Whole Foods built its brand on refusing ingredients other stores allow. Its own published list of unacceptable additives runs past 80 substances. Independent laboratory testing found 1,040 parts per billion of glyphosate in 365 whole wheat sandwich bread, one of the highest readings recorded for any branded bread in that entire testing project, roughly 3 times the highest number Florida's state test found in any product. Here's what most people miss about that 80-plus banned ingredients list. It covers additives like artificial dyes, bromated flour, and specific preservatives, things a manufacturer chooses to put in. It was never built as a pesticide residue testing program. And Whole Foods has never required its own additional finished product glyphosate testing beyond the standard USDA organic certification every other organic brand on a competitor's shelf already carries. The quality standards reputation and the actual testing rigor behind it are two different things wearing the same trust. Several former Whole Foods executives, including a former vice president who spent 14 years at the company, have spoken publicly about a more centralized, logistics-driven supply chain, replacing the sourcing philosophy the company was originally built on since Amazon's $13.7 billion acquisition in 2017. If you've made it this far, tell me which one surprised you most in the comments. I read every one. Subscribe because this list keeps growing. What the organic seal actually means. Quick important clarification before the safe picks. USDA organic certification verifies farming practice, no intentional synthetic pesticide application, confirmed through an annual paperwork and practices audit. It is not a routine finished product contamination test, and drift from a neighboring conventional field isn't covered by the certification's core promise at all. If you want an actual result-based guarantee, look for certifications built specifically around finished product lab testing rather than farming method alone. That's a meaningfully different promise than organic makes on its own. And as you just heard with Dave's Killer Bread, non-GMO isn't testing for pesticide residue either. It's answering a completely separate question. The ones that held up. For Life Ezekiel Bread. No flour at all. For Life sprouts 6 organic whole grains and legumes and bakes them slowly. A genuinely different process from standard industrial bread. Family owned in Corona, California since 1964, with no corporate acquisition on record. Independent testing has found its glyphosate levels below standard laboratory detection limits. One detail worth knowing, because sprouting germinates the grain before baking, the plant briefly becomes a living, growing seedling, again a state that happens well after any pre-harvest desiccant would have been applied to the original crop, for whatever residue that timing difference is worth. The honest caveat: it's dense, not soft. Most people find it better toasted than as a standard sandwich loaf, and without preservatives it molds at room temperature, fast, a sign of what's not in it. Not a flaw. 1 Degree Organics publishes a CR traceable farm source for every ingredient down to the specific field, and states it submits samples to third-party labs for glyphosate testing on an ongoing basis, a standard no regulation requires. The ingredient list runs about 7 items, all recognizable food. Caveat: distribution is limited to natural grocers and direct order in a lot of regions, so it takes more effort to find than a supermarket loaf. Silver Hills Sprouted Bakery. A Canadian family-owned bakery whose products have consistently tested below detection limits for glyphosate. Silver Hills has stated publicly that the WHO's 2015 classification of glyphosate as a probable carcinogen directly shaped its sourcing standards, company adjusting to evidence rather than lobbying against it. Softer and more sandwich-friendly than Ezekiel bread, available at Whole Foods, Sprouts, and other natural grocers in the US. Caveat: costs more than a supermarket loaf, and not every region carries it. None of these 3 are owned by Bimbo, Flowers Foods, Campbell's, or Amazon. They answer to a name that's actually on the building and to a testing standard higher than the government requires them to meet. 2 corporations own most of the different brands on the worst half of this list. The organic seal on several of them didn't stop meaningful contamination in a few cases. It sat right next to some of the highest readings recorded. The non-GMO seal, on wheat specifically, was never testing for the right thing to begin with. That's not a reason to panic every time you make toast. It's a reason to know that organic, non-GMO, and whole grain each answer one narrow question, and none of them answer the question you actually care about, which is what's in the loaf when it reaches your kitchen. One rule that gets you most of the way there without memorizing a single brand name: flip the bag, count the ingredients. Real bread is flour, water, salt, and yeast, 5 ingredients or fewer, if you count a small amount of oil. Everything past that was added to extend shelf life, hold moisture, or cut cost, not to make better bread. Most people grabbing a loaf this week have no idea any of this sits behind the label. Now you do. Next week, clothing brands and the ownership chart behind your favorite sustainable label is going to change how you shop. Subscribe if you haven't, you'll want to be here for that one.